This is your World War III update. I've had to unplug for the last few days. To be brutally honest, I've needed a break. Spending time with friends and family, trying to immerse myself in the moment has been difficult, knowing what I know, but it's been necessary because we have to indulge in what's it worth if we're preparing and not experiencing in its fullness and totality this wonderful civilization and period of relative peace and stability that is woven together with very, very fine threads. I think we would be remiss to get to the apocalypse only to have discovered that we never truly embraced and appreciated what we had when we had it. So I needed to unplug for a few days. We released some prefab content, but now we're back. And so is the perilous sense of dread that lurks over my shoulder at every move, thinking about what might come in 2025. You know, as preppers, we have a predilection for seeking bad news. That is advantageous in a bear market, but very disadvantageous in an irrational bull market that's been raging for years, arguably, despite all of the global catastrophe that has unfolded in that time. I don't think we've seen anything yet. And needless to say, I have a very bad feeling about 2025. I believe it's going to be a continuation of 2024, which by all accounts was not good. Okay, it wasn't good for the economy. It wasn't good. I mean, for the fake economy, of course, it was. For Fartcoin and every other superficial aspect of the economy, it was great. But the fundamentals, it was terrible. It was a bad year for geopolitics, for the wars that continue to intensify to this day. It was a bad year for contagions like bird flu that are permeating every aspect of agriculture. And I think this is potentially going to be a shocking scenario unfolding in the coming year ahead, because this thing is just killing everything. I mean, remember a couple of years ago when it started off with the seals? Because I think the seals were getting pooped on by the seagulls, so the seals were dying from it, and it started to just really become endemic in the wild bird population, and it just all of a sudden bird flu was everywhere, and nobody stopped talking about it, and the price of eggs shot up, and they're shooting up again. And now it's basically just commonplace that it's in livestock populations. Cats are dying from it. There's a sanctuary in, is it Washington, I believe, where half of the big cats in this zoo or sanctuary, whatever you want to call, whatever the euphemism they're using nowadays, have died, okay? So this thing appears to be killing everything. This has the potential to be a disease, not just for its ability to affect humans and for it to potentially be just one mutation away from human to human transmission of a highly virulent pathogen, which unfortunately nobody is going to trust the government anymore. And I, quite frankly, will be one of those people. They basically blew their load on the last pandemic. They overreacted, and nobody's going to take them on their word anymore, which is unfortunate because we very well could have a very serious situation on our hands, not only for the human-to-human transmission component or potentiality, but also for this thing to completely destroy agriculture. Maybe that's what they want. You know, I'm sure there's going to be all kinds of conspiracy theories around that, but I believe that that is going to be one of the defining stories of 2025, if not 2026, 2027. I think that it's imminent. It's in the wastewater. The cats are dying from it. It's in all the wild birds. It's infecting poultry and bovine populations. It's really, only a matter of time. I mean, statistically speaking, I'm not an epidemiologist or virologist, but just looking at the data that we have, it's incredible. Given how we're led to believe that coronavirus emerged, which pretty much now. I think it's common knowledge at least, or a widely accepted theory, that there's a very high likelihood that it leaked from a lab. But if you were to assume that that came from nature, well, the conditions for bird flu jumping into humans and mutating from human to human is far more likely now than it was with the coronavirus. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of a few more TikToks, and that's going to be our reality. How that unfolds, I'm not going to make any statements about what the aftermath is going to be. I will say that there are certain things you can do to protect yourself that don't require any sort of medical interventions. Although with something so virulent as it potentially could be, I would never give somebody the advice of not doing something just because the government was wrong in the past about certain things, because that could be incredibly dangerous advice. So I think we're entering a period where we're going to have a confluence of catastrophic, cataclysmic events unfolding, which are only going to get worse. A lot of people are putting a misguided faith in the Trump campaign. We've seen fissures in the past few days, all because of the H-1B visa situation. And this is something that I anticipated. There's a lot of racial undertones. There's a lot of just tension and irreconciled differences that are going to need to be resolved if there's going to be any sort of harmonization and unilateral moves over the next 4 years that are going to change the course of things. Because right now, there needs to be a change. Good or bad, something has to change. Now, what's going on with Russia and Ukraine is going to get worse, okay? If anything, I think that this is where we reach the final impasse. I'm going to explain the actual details as to why in just a moment. But Russia appears to have been withholding some of its more lethal and significant responses to a lot of the provocations as of late. I think out of the very faint hope that perhaps under a Trump administration, there would be more doors open to potential negotiations and off-ramps to de-escalation. But if, in fact, which I think it is going to prove fruitless and futile, if that is the case, then we enter a very, very dark period. Because it's one thing to continue with the Biden-Kamala plan. In fact, I would say that that is a very predictable trajectory of escalation that Putin and a lot of his cronies would have been probably content with, because it's predictable. But with Trump, it could go one way, and it could be great for the Russians. It could be potentially really good, but it also could potentially go very, very badly. We've never seen Trump put in a situation where a country was not receptive to some of his, showmanship and these ostentatious displays of strength and frivolity, which, of course, will likely work itself out into some sort of photo op, handshake, sit down, 1 hour long meeting about this and that. But is it really going to yield the results? If the Kim Jong-un Rocket Man saga was any indication of how this is going to go with Russia, then that means that it's going to get really, really ugly. And the Russians aren't saying that, not because they don't want to piss off Trump. I think it's because they don't want to spook people. Understand right now, the Russians have basically removed the moratorium on intermediate range nuclear forces. What has happened today is they are now going to be deploying intermediate and shorter range nuclear missiles, citing U.S. deployments. Up until Trump in 2016 to 2020, there was something called the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which banned the deployment of these because it made it very difficult if there was a intensification of hostilities between the Soviet Union and Europe, or NATO at the time. It would limit the amount of time that they could respond and react and potentially negotiate and de-escalate things. So the first move of disarmament and to try to cool, or perhaps that's not warm the Cold War, or maybe just simmer the Cold War, is to first get rid of these intermediate range missiles because they can get to their destination in 10, 15 minutes. And as a result of that, that leaves very little time for there to be any de-escalation, leading to potential imminent mutually assured destruction and full-on strategic warfare. So they got rid of these. They came back under Trump. Now, is it any surprise that right before Trump takes office, not only did the Russians put on display the Orezhnik intermediate missile system, which can, of course, be nuclear tipped, they're saying that they have not qualitatively or quantitatively went outside the INF treaty, even though the United States is no longer a party to this treaty, that they have changed the quality of the systems that they're producing, but not the quantity. But now they're saying they're going to improve the quantity as well. This comes on word that there's going to be Tomahawk missiles deployed in Germany very soon. So it doesn't look good. I mean, it just does not look good. It's very easy to be blinded by the superficial relationships that are portrayed on what we see on TV. And the Russians are going to play along with that. So a lot of people, unfortunately and misguidedly, take the Russians at their word way too much. Okay? Vladimir Putin is going to shake Trump's hand. Trump is going to shake Vladimir Putin's hand. But that doesn't really mean a thing when it comes down to it, because there are much bigger economic forces at play. And even if Trump was 100% sincere in his efforts to try to have rapprochement with the Russians, there will be deep state elements that seek to sabotage that relationship. So the outlook is bleak. It is very, very bleak. And we should continue to prepare and use this time. You know, I see so many people getting upset because, you know, we're preaching, I don't like the word preaching, but we're promoting a sense of urgency and imminence with getting prepared for hard times. And that's because if you don't do that, people won't do anything. Okay, so there has to always be this sense of imminence with it all. And people get frustrated when, you know, things don't happen and they feel as though they're just wasting their time. But the day is going to come, be it who knows when it's going to be, 2027, 2028, when all of this, you know, everything that we're doing now is going to all make sense. It might be 3 years, 4 years, even 10 years. We'd be lucky if we have 10 years. I wish I had that long to build out the microcosm that I need in order to thrive in a self-sustaining, perpetual manner. I need that time in order to build out the homestead that I want, that I truly want. I don't think we're going to have that much time. But we have to approach this with a sense of urgency, because that's the only way to maintain motivation in the face of so many distractions. Okay? So it appears as though bird flu, yes, 2025, I'm putting my money on bird flu. I wouldn't have said that in 2024, but now all the signs are there, okay? And the media is getting us warmed up to it. And what's strange and what we should remember is, remember that the media was downplaying the coronavirus when it first came out. Do you remember that? They were saying it's not a big deal, it's just in China. There was rumors that it was just affecting Asian people. We don't have to close the borders. Don't worry about masks, yada, yada, yada. Everything that you're hearing right now, just remember that, okay? Just remember how fast they can flip. Look at that Jolani character in Syria, how fast they threw that guy in a suit, that Al-Qaeda asset who had a $10 million bounty on his head. Look how fast they flipped the script on that. They can change a blue square to red in a matter of minutes. So believe nothing that they say and just look at the data. The data suggests that that's a big one. Now, how that factors into geopolitics is anybody's best guess. I mean, let's not forget that the chief in Russia of their biowarfare program was just assassinated a couple weeks ago, and he claimed that there were all kinds of secret US labs that were meddling with this kind of stuff, and that they were actually releasing some of these pathogens. Now, I'm not, speaking to the veracity of those claims. I'm just saying that's another thing to keep in mind here, is that biowarfare is most certainly at play. And who's to say that in an attempt to avert a global thermonuclear crisis, somebody or one side of the equation would not try to release something, especially now amidst this backdrop of bird flu saturating the environment. It's very easy to justify an organic origin narrative. You could say that, whereas in Wuhan, okay, a lot different, the Wuhan coronavirus lab right there, it's very hard to convince people that emerged naturally, whereas this one, now all the conditions are met. And if you were on one side or the other and you were trying to avert a nuclear war, I mean, it could potentially exacerbate it, but I would say that it might actually put the brakes on things to have another global pandemic, wave of lockdowns. And of course, all of this would be preparatory for a world war, getting people on lockdown. And in many ways, the pandemic was a preparation for that. It was priming people to be obedient, albeit to a more health-based form of authoritarianism, but that could quickly be converted to a militant style, martial law style, war mobilization style of dictatorship. So, yeah, Lavrov has dismissed the U.S. proposal to delay Ukraine's NATO membership and establish a demilitarized zone. So that rumored call that Donald Trump made to Vladimir Putin, which was later walked back, although I would say that there's probably kernels of truth there, I'm guessing it didn't go as planned. Okay, I'm guessing that there may have, in fact, been some communication, and now Sergei Lavrov has confirmed that they're dismissing a U.S. proposal which effectively was going to delay Ukraine's membership for about 20 years. They've said that they're not going to agree to this. Now, I would have thought that the Russians would, in the very least, accept to the west of the Dnieper River, that they would accept that NATO could be in control of that. And they're not. It appears as though that is not a reality they're willing to entertain for reasons that I'm unaware. If they believe that they're able to seize that part of the country and somehow control those people without endless asymmetrical conflict and guerrilla warfare, I would be surprised. But Lavrov has rejected Trump's initial peace proposal, and they're removing the moratorium on intermediate range nuclear forces. Guys, this doesn't look good, okay, no matter how you slice it. There has been a lot of news with respect to attacks, hybrid warfare attacks, becoming pretty much indisputable at this point in time. Here's what's going down with that. So we have recently a situation in the Baltic where Finnish police have seized a Russian tanker, Eagle S, which is accused of damaging the Est-Link 2 cable and conducting reconnaissance. They're already referring to all Russian civilian vessels as military vessels. And you have countries like Latvia, how they're going to enforce this, I have no idea, and Finland, as well as other NATO nations, saying that they're going to start to seize and search these Russian ships when they pass through these waters as a result of this fifth generation warfare, this hybrid warfare. NATO is going to increase its presence in the Baltic Sea in response to this. But most importantly, this is really the biggest story. In the next 48 hours, Russian gas is going to cease, at least on paper, transiting Ukrainian pipelines, going to places like Slovakia and Austria and Moldova and Transnistria. And this is really the final economic guardrail that prevented all-out war in Ukraine. Something that we've talked about for the longest time, but we've never really been able to make sense of is things like, why is Zelensky still alive? Why haven't the Russians completely destroyed Ukraine's critical infrastructure as of yet? And the answer was staring us right in the face. And it's something that we talked about on this channel ad nauseum on numerous occasions, calling attention to the apparent contradiction of the Russians continuing to do business, the Russian state-owned Gazprom continuing to do business and paying Ukraine transit fees that Ukraine then uses to build weapons to fight against the Russians. It made no sense, but it appears as though that contract is now coming to an end. Now, the idea that contracts are dignified in that sort of climate where you have hundreds of thousands of people dying and the strategic defeat of Russia hanging in the balance, it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever, does it? But now that that final economic guardrail is gone, it makes you wonder what's going to happen now. What's going to happen now that Russia has very little vested interest in continuing to sacrifice its own troops to allow Ukraine to function just so it can transit $100 million worth of Russian natural gas every day? So we're talking about billions and billions of dollars, which is no longer going to be flowing into the coffers of the Ukrainian leadership. And this is not necessarily, as far as I know it, anyways, something that the Russians want. It appears as though the Russians and the Slovakians, they want Russian gas to continue flowing, but it's Zelensky who doesn't want that gas to flow anymore. So, again, that contracts are something that are honored in this current environment makes very little sense. So is the end of the contract, is that a nothing burger? Is the gas going to continue to flow? I imagine it will to an extent. Just because the contract has not been renewed doesn't mean the gas is going to automatically stop. But what it does mean is that it could stop. And we know the Russians are very jurisprudent. So I would presume that they would likely view this as a quantitative shift in the nature of this conflict, in that we are now going to see Russia wage total war and possibly outright declare full-on war against Ukraine. Remember, they haven't done that. Putin has referred to it as a war, which was a big step in 2024, the first time he actually referred to it as a war. Before, it was a special military operation. Remember, the Russians view this as a civil war. They view Ukraine as a country which is essentially fraternal with the Russians, and many Russians there, of course, speak the same language, Russian, in Ukraine. And so they view this as a civil war, and that essentially Ukraine is being held hostage by NATO forces, who are perhaps, according to the Russians, more sympathetic to ideologies of old, ones which were supposed to be removed during World War II, but apparently lingering. Now, in terms of what else is going on, we have Russia withdrawing from the MNEPR nuclear cleanup agreement. Basically, this is a certain set of standards overseen, I presume, by the, what do they call them, the International Atomic Energy Agency. I presume it's under the auspices of that organization that sets the standards for the removal and safe disposal of various radioactive goods. Of course, is there nuclear warfare implications here? Absolutely. When it comes to dirty bombs, when it comes to the whole nuclear sniffer row or row, however people want to call it. If you're English, you call it row. If you're, an American, you call it row. The drone sniffing, nuke sniffing row. All of that's going to have implications because it's going to mean a lack of universal standards for how these things are dealt with, and just a further decoupling from East and West, which makes the potential for an accident much, much higher. We have the S-500 Prometheus system, which is according to the Russians, one of the world's most advanced missile defense systems, which even has the capability to shoot down a satellite. Recall that this system was first tested prior to the war, and it's also, I should add, the basis for the movie Gravity with Sandra Bullock. Talk about life imitating art, or the other way around, however you want to cut it. The Russians have the capability to take out one of their own satellites, and that's another message that they sent during Trump's tenure I believe that was in 2019 when they shot that down. Actually, no, was that in 2019? No, that was actually during Biden. That was in 2021. Biden and Putin had met, and then in 2021, the Russians shot down one of their own satellites with this system, and then the war started a few months later. Now, they are deploying that, and that is a threat to NATO's capabilities. It has a very long range, much longer than the Patriot and even the THAAD systems, and it's capable of targeting satellites, shuttles, and ICBMs. There's been rumors, and this is just rumor at this point, and this is typically not something I dignify, but it's one of those situations where the evidence, while it is circumstantial and not entirely convincing, makes you want to have a second look. There was a recent detonation of a weapons facility, so they're saying, in Tartus in Syria, and it caused measurable radiation spikes in Turkey and Cyprus. Now, this could be due, and the explosion, to the untrained eye, it's going to look nuclear. There's no doubt about it. And the destruction apparently was that of what you would expect of a very low-yield tactical nuclear weapon. Now, again, I'm not saying this is the case. This ain't a hill I'm going to die on. In fact, I'm more than happy to accept the idea that this very well just was a conventional detonation of a very large stockpile of weapons. But there is some compelling evidence to suggest that maybe there was a low-yield tactical nuke. Now, even if there is a radiation spike, there could have been depleted uranium there. There could have been radioactive substances in these facilities that was detonated and kicked up into the air, and that is what is registering the radiation spike. So it is really hard to say. But, you know, it's something that I've looked into for people who've been messaging me about it, but I'm not convinced either way. Continuing the multipolarity issue, Telegram has blocked major Russian outlets across the EU for violating local laws, including RIA Novosti and Channel One. So again, you know, we're starting to be cut off from lines of communication. These are not positive things. If Trump actually was going to change anything, we would not be seeing these escalatory developments across the board. Things would already starting to be rolled back in a lot of ways. But the fact that everything is just ramping up, I mean, you just got to call a spade at some point. Zelensky is also hinting that there's going to be a significant announcement very soon that is going to be a quantitative increase in U.S. support, long-term defense support. So is this going to be a new type of defensive platform? Is this going to be a new weapon system that they're going to introduce into Ukraine? We don't know as of yet, but there is going to be a big announcement in the next day, I've been informed. In terms of the Nord Stream controversy, this is another big deal because, of course, Trump was against Nord Stream, okay? And that is really Russia's lifeline when it comes to sustaining relations with the EU. There has to be some sort of mutually beneficial arrangement, and the arrangement is that the Russians were going to give the Europeans a good deal on gas, and they had the pipeline all set up, and that would have made the European economy far more competitive with the American economy. Trump was against Nord Stream, so he didn't shed a tear when Nord Stream was destroyed. And this cessation of gas transit through Ukraine is something which maps on to Trump's economic policy, which is to basically cut Europe off of Russian gas. Now, there are rumors that a U.S. financier, Stephen Lynch, is going to seek permission to buy the Nord Stream pipeline. If it is still even potentially operational, they're saying it is. I would presume that the thing is flooding with seawater and corroding at the bottom of the ocean, or at least one of them, which may be on repair. Depending on, who you listen to, some will say it is capable of being repaired, others will say it won't. But even if it is at this point, why would you want to commit to that knowing full well that it could just be sabotaged in the future, and whatever sort of relation that you have or agreement that you have between Russia and Germany or Europe or whoever is going to be, overseeing that is going to be sustainable in the long term. So what is likely going to happen, I think, is we're probably going to see Zelensky get removed in Ukraine this year. I think his time is up. The Russians are not going to agree to anything that Zelensky signs because they're not going to view it as being something which is going to be honored long term, because according to them, he's an illegitimate leader because he postponed elections. And, the deep state, Trump, they don't care who is in charge of Ukraine so long as they're playing ball with the West. And Zelensky's time might have run out as soon as he ceases to be effective in the role, especially placating his own population. And as soon as he slips below a certain popularity level, they'll remove him really quick. And I think that time is coming. They just don't have a person with which they can replace him just yet. But I do think that time is coming. So economically, Trump is at odds with Russia. And this is not even getting into the issue of global reserve currency and just U.S. sphere of influence in Europe. There is no way that Trump can allow Russia to continue, even if he wanted to, the whole thing would be sabotaged. So I understand that people want to feel hopeful at this point in time, but when you're seeing the divide, amidst the right over something as trivial, in my personal opinion, in the grand scheme of things, as, a few 100,000 tech workers coming in, is it an important issue? Yeah, it is an important issue. Is something that needs attention? Absolutely it does. Is it the biggest issue that we're contending with in 2025? Not by a long shot. In fact, it's a massive diversion, I think, and it's probably just to get people fighting with one another. And I'm sure that there are some deep state actors who are fanning the flames of that divide as well. So in terms of the Baltic Sea, things are heating up. So all of the shadow fleet, the Russian shadow fleet, I believe there's hundreds of ships in the Russian shadow fleet, are now going to be subject not only to sanctions, but also possible seizure. Now, Russia has responded and said that this type of embargo would be an act of war and would be a reason probably why the Baltics are building, fortifications along the border with Russia, and why Poland is expected to close its borders with Belarus by summertime, and the reason why they're building these dragon's teeth and closing all the borders. That's likely the reason why. Denmark is considering a blockade of Russian vessels in the Baltic, which of course would be a declaration of war. The Danish Prime Minister claims that she is stockpiling food for potential emergencies. Now, I presume they have a continuity of government plan, but it appears as though in her personal life, this is something that she takes seriously. Yet, organizations like Vice and authors like Annie Jacobsen would like to convince people that preparing for nuclear war is pointless, right? Meanwhile, all of these European leaders are very surreptitiously trying to encourage their population to prepare without inciting a panic. That's what this is all about. It's just time-released incrementalism towards preparedness so that by the time the shit's getting ready to blow, then they can sound the alarm, and then it's not going to be as much pandemonium as if they would have just left this till the last minute. Sweden is expanding cemeteries in preparation for large-scale war casualties. Yes, you heard that correct. And this is one I had to double check because I thought this was an onion skip. No, Sweden is actually expecting tens of thousands of deaths as a result of war with Russia. And as a part of their war preparations, of course, they released that little dinky pamphlet not too long ago to convince their population to prepare for war. I mean, imagine joining NATO and immediately you receive, okay, we joined NATO, yay. And then a few months later, you get a pamphlet in the mail saying, yeah, you got to prepare for war with Russia and we need to expand our cemetery capacity. I wonder if people are concerned that maybe that wasn't such a great idea. Poland is closing its border with Belarus by mid-2025, as I indicated, as a part of the Eastern Shield project, which is something which extends all the way down to Slovakia and, I guess it would be Poland to Finland, to the northern front. They're committed to supplying Ukraine's energy needs after Slovakia halts electricity imports. So what's happening is Russian gas transits Ukraine, goes to places like Moldova, Transnistria, and Slovakia. They're no longer going to be getting that gas. So Robert Fico, because this was Zelensky's decision, has said, if you don't let us get the gas that we need to function, we're going to stop sending you electricity. 7% of Slovakia's electricity is the result of fossil fuels. I presume that they have a natural gas power plant or two, which of course they pipe some of that electricity into Ukraine. Now, they thought that this was going to be a bit of leverage in the negotiating. Now Poland has stepped in and says, don't worry about it. Whatever shortfall in electricity you experience as a result of Robert Fico and Slovakia not providing you electricity, we will fill the void. And so this means that this is going to only be more incentive for Zelensky to pull the plug on the agreement with Russia. The question is, if he does that, what level of escalation happens shortly thereafter? And is Ukraine truly prepared to deal with the consequences of Russia no longer having any sort of economic incentive to go easy on Ukraine? Because presumably they have. I mean, Kiev has been largely untouched, with the exception of some key targets and very specific surgical targets. They've been largely spared from the worst that we're seeing on the front. And that, of course, is not because the Russians are having all their stuff shot down and they're terrible shots like some people think. Sure, they're not perfect, but if they wanted to, they could easily level that city with conventional weapons, never mind unconventional ones. So the fact that they aren't says that they're withholding. Now, Moldova, there's been an interesting development there as well. For the longest time, we've been talking about the Kabazna munitions depot. This is the largest ammunition depot with 20,000 tons of Soviet-era equipment. At least it was before the war started. You've been seeing these massive nuclear-like explosions. Nuclear-like, I didn't say that they're nuclear. At Russian ammo depots that, of course, have been the result of Ukrainian drones, they claim, although some of them have the hallmarks of cruise missiles of the either the ATACMS or the Storm Shadow sort. But the Kabazna munitions depot, which is located in Transnistria, has been something that has been relished by the Moldovans because, of course, it's a great bargaining chip with Ukraine. The Moldovans need Russian gas as well. And the Russians, who are not going to be able to provide that gas to the Moldovans, now the prime minister, I can't remember what her name is, or the president, what is her name? It's on the tip of my tongue. Anyways, they're saying that they might have to invade Transnistria to seize the Kabazna ammunitions depot amid these tensions. Now, I do think that if they were to do that, knowing that those munitions could slip into the hands of the Ukrainians, I suspect the Russians would just destroy it. I don't think that Russia is in a position to defend Transnistria from an invasion by Ukraine and Moldova. Now, Moldova has rejected Ukraine's offer to invade Transnistria from, I guess it would be the east, from the Ukrainian flank. And they rejected that because, of course, it's a matter of sovereignty. But there appears to be a bit of a love triangle there between Moldova, Ukraine, and Russia as well. There's many pro-Russian elements inside Moldova. Of course, Transnistria is a Russian territory for all intents and purposes, de facto part of Russia, although not de jure. And it appears as though they don't have the manpower there to be able to defend it if they wanted to. So what they would likely do, and this display that we've seen recently where the Russians shot a few missiles that passed over Romania and Moldova and weren't shot down before entering into Ukraine, that appeared to be some kind of veiled threat. In hindsight, it appears to be a veiled threat towards the Moldovans that you better not try anything because either we're going to attack you or we are going to probably just destroy all the ammunition that's in the place. There's only 1,500 Russian soldiers there, which is not at all sufficient in terms of, and it's a very hard territory to defend because it's a very long country. And there have been movements since the start of the war that appear to be feint maneuvers, maneuver type warfare occurring that have been constantly keeping the Russians on their toes in that region, always fearing that Ukraine is about to invade and try to get the Soviet-era equipment, which Ukraine desperately needs in order to continue the fight. Now, there was a Russian delegation that secretly visited the United States. We don't know what it was. We just know that there was a plane, a government plane, made a 2-day visit to Washington and New York. This, of course, is fueling speculation about negotiations, but I think it's just as likely that this is something to do with the ambassadorial placement in the country and something diplomat related, whether they're removing diplomats or maybe we're going to see another Russian ambassador who replaced the one who left recently. It's possible, or, this could be as much a bad sign as it is good. We just don't know actually what the result of this is. In terms of what's going on in Iran, there's a lot of big question marks there. Russia is about to sign a strategic partnership with Iran, and they're doing it right before Trump gets elected on January 17th, not elected, right before he takes office on the 17th, clearly sending a message that the relationship between the Russians and the Iranians is ironclad. They've also received Su-35 jets. Now, there's a debate on how many. The most recent figure I heard was that the Iranians received some of Russia's most advanced Su-35 aircraft, 15 to be exact, with more expected in spring of 2025. This, of course, would drastically increase their capabilities of defending against an Israeli attack on, be it their nuclear facilities or some of their ballistic missile assets. So we see the playing pieces on the chessboard continuing to develop. And of course, you have the China One Belt, One Road initiative that is going to be passing right through Iran. So China has a vested interest in supporting the Iranians, at least economically, to some extent. Rumor has it that Ukraine is going to lower its mobilization age, and NATO is going to continue to supply copious amounts of tanks. The United States are not the only ones supplying Abrams tanks. In fact, there are dozens of other Abrams tanks being supplied by other countries. Armored vehicles, drones, Ukraine making its own cruise missiles, all of that is going to mature in 2025. It's showing no signs of slowing down whatsoever. I know people are very fatigued, but now is not the time to give up in your preparedness. And this is why you can't be one of these freak out, panic, adrenaline preppers. Because of course, adrenaline is going to burn you the hell out. We have to be long term. In fact, I would encourage people to go watch my 5-year plan preparedness video where I talk about what I would do if I had 5 years. Because that's really the most sensible way to approach this, is think about it in terms of 5 years. Getting yourself into a position where you can build out the self-sustaining systems with all of the principles that we've talked to, with all the experts that we've brought on through the channel, whether it's in terms of operational security, strategic relocation, agriculture, the types of foods to store, the types of foods to grow, and just, the whole gamut of a preparedness endeavor is something that you should be, I hate saying should, but if I was new to preparedness at this point in time, I would give myself a 5-year plan. As much as I want people to prep with urgency, I also think that if you're too short term in your thinking, then you're potentially going to be making the wrong decisions, especially if things don't go south right away. There was a power outage in Greenland, and of course some people are thinking that this has something to do with Trump's comments. Of course, Greenland is saying that they're going to commit 1.5 billion. Greenland, overseen by Iceland, is going to. Is it Iceland that oversees Greenland? I think it is. It's such a geopolitically insignificant country in the grand scheme of, I shouldn't say geopolitically, economically. Geopolitically, it's closer to Russia, I suppose, but so is Alert, the northernmost point in Canada, and so is Alaska. So, but I guess it would, with the Russians positioning themselves around the North Pole with their massive nuclear ice-breaking fleet and the North Passage and all this stuff, the United States is trying to gain a foothold up there, and a lot of people are thinking this blackout was perhaps some kind of sabotage operation or cyber attack by the Americans. I don't think it is. I think it's just, it probably is commonplace up there. We just never hear about it because there's only 50,000 people living there. Who knows? Who knows? Mark Zuckerberg denies claims that he is building a nuclear bunker. He's saying it's just for hurricanes. I can tell you with 100% certainty, don't ask me how I know, but that's bullshit. It's a 100% full-on nuclear bunker. And why wouldn't? I mean, I can understand why you want to downplay it. Every billionaire, you got to be real dumb not to have a massive bunker. If I was a billionaire, the first thing I would build is a massive vault. A bunker. And I get no kickbacks from Ron over at Atlas Survival Shelters. I want you guys to know that. Zero. I've not taken a dime from that guy over all the years. We're just friends, okay? But I can tell you that there's plenty of reasons to have a bunker that extend well beyond, just preparing for doomsday and nuclear fallout. I mean, you're probably going to have a basement anyways. So why not have a basement that goes a little bit deeper? You can use it as a root cellar if you want to. It's a constant temperature. If you live in an environment where it's very cold and, maybe you have all of these redundant systems for heating, but as a last ditch redundancy, you could go down into this bunker. It's still going to be cold, but it's not going to be minus 40 degrees. It's going to be like a constant temperature. I'm not sure what it would be but it would be above freezing anyways down there below the frost line where you're going to put this thing. It could be a panic room. It could be just a place to store your stuff, a secure place to store your stuff. It could be for the purpose of natural disaster mitigation, like tornadoes. I mean, we live in a place where, seriously, at my acreage this year, I thought we were going to see a tornado rip through. It was that close. In fact, it did come within 20 kilometers of where we were. So there's all kinds of practical reasons to have really a bunker. All it is a glorified basement, which is reinforced. And it'd be a great panic room as well. A place, if you needed to temporarily remove yourself from harm's way, you could go down there temporarily. There's plenty of reasons to have a bunker that extend beyond doomsday survival. So anyways, I think the stigma associated with it is unwarranted. Now, in terms of, I'm going to save my Arthur C. Clarke quote because I don't want to overload people with information today, but I have an excellent Arthur C. Clarke quote that I want to share with you in a future video, which summarizes our human predicament that we face today. But I'm going to leave you on a practical note. Now, if you are concerned about the bird flu, which I'm not losing sleep over it, to be honest, but I do see that there are a multitude of complications that would arise if this thing does take off, be it from a civil war, civil unrest point of view, people, protesting, resisting government authoritarianism, how that factors into the economic situation, another lockdown, further increasing multipolarity, how it factors into the conflicts, biowarfare, and just the pandemic itself, how it affects agriculture, how it affects your own flock of chickens and cows. I mean, anyways, there's a myriad of ways it can affect us all. But when it comes down to preparing for the actual flu itself, and if you're a person who doesn't want to get the intervention that they're going to roll out and possibly make mandatory if the thing is virulent enough, well, there's things you can do. And I often don't do sponsorships on the channel, but Jace Medical is something that I buy every chance I get because you can buy it so many times a year. And I've been amassing a boatload of medications because medications, never mind expiration dates, they did shelf life extension studies that show that they can last well beyond their shelf life, especially if you store them. They're going to retain a lot of their potency long past the expiration dates. That's from the US military, okay? That's not from me. Anyways, there are 5 key medications that you can get via prescription with your Jace medical subscription, and I have all of these medications. Tamiflu, oseltamivir, that's the first line of defense against influenza. It will work on the bird flu. If you start taking it within 48 hours of symptoms, it will basically, I presume, diminish the effects, make the illness less potentially severe. Now, if we're talking about a bird flu with a 60% fatality rate, I don't know. But I guess it's better than nothing. If you knew something had a 50% and above chance of killing you, you'd probably try anything, right? So this is not medical advice. I'm just saying that you can get Tamiflu, which is a prescription-only medication from Jace Medical. Link will be in the description with a coupon code. Also, they also allow you to get something called albuterol, which is an inhaler that opens airways during severe respiratory distress like wheezing or asthma attacks. This is going to be useful for respiratory complications associated with influenza and other illnesses. I have some of that. Prednisone, I'm not sure if this is one, I think it is one that we have, but I'm going to have to check the medicine cabinet when I get home. It's a steroid that reduces inflammation in the lungs, which can prevent serious respiratory distress, also critical for managing conditions that worsen during respiratory illnesses. Also, ondansetron, which is something a family member had to use recently. And I believe you can also, don't quote me on this, because this is just layman brain, but I think this might be something you can use for acute radiation sickness as well. Nausea and vomiting are common with flu symptoms. Ondansetron treats nausea and vomiting, can prevent dehydration. And doxycycline is but one of the numerous prescription antibiotics that you can get from Jace Medical. Secondary bacterial infections like pneumonia are a real threat. I've probably used my Jace Medical kit 3 times in terms of the antibiotics. And I've never been a big antibiotic person, but, as I get older and my immune system starts to struggle a bit more, I find that I just don't recover as quickly as I used to could. So, I'm trying to supplement wherever possible. So that's pretty much the news today, my friends. Your 1-hour World War III update. Reluctantly realistic. I was going to say optimistic. I ain't optimistic for 2025. Not at all. I think it's going to be a bad year. I think that they're going to crash the economy on Trump's watch. And if anybody thinks that this raging bull market can continue for another 4 years, it necessitates a hyperinflation like no other. It appears as though inflation is going to be making a comeback very, very soon. And all of the schemes and the mechanisms that were practiced during the Biden administration to suppress the price of gold, to suppress the price of oil, to prevent the Middle Eastern conflict from getting out of control because they didn't want these things happening on the Democrats' watch. All of that goes out the window January 20th, and they could just crash the whole thing. I mean, bird flu, it's a perfect storm right now for bird flu. Geopolitics, will the global lockdown intensify conflict? Will that be something that brings people to the negotiating table? I would imagine that is going to be something that limits diplomacy because, remember when Putin was meeting with people at the end of those long tables, during COVID, because all the leadership was scared of getting the disease. If you think that was bad for that illness. Just imagine how it's going to be with a more virulent illness. So that, of course, is going to drastically complicate things, and how that factors in on the front line is anybody's best guess. So there's all kinds of complications that come with that. Again, you don't come to this channel for good news. You don't come to this channel for feel-good content. There are still some people who come to the channel and surprised that I'm not giving them a rosy picture of the future. And I don't know why they keep coming. I guess it's because they're slowly becoming a prepper and they don't realize it, perhaps. I hope you are. And I hope we have more time. Here's to 2025. Let's try to have some fun at the same time. You guys know we do. Watch some of our blue strip content. If you want to break from the doom and gloom stuff, I would encourage you to, because every opportunity I get off camera, it's prepping related. I know some people think this is just a grift and this is just so that I can advance myself. Personally, I started a prepper before I ever had a channel. I was a prepper before I ever sold a prepping item. I was a prepper, and I'll be long after the fact. And it's because I genuinely don't trust the way the world is going. And I'm not trying to give anybody advice here or issue any shoulds, but I will say that you might want to consider getting ready for austerity. In the very least, if that's all we had to deal with was austerity, then, you know, that would be a good outcome, in my opinion. But let's just see what happens. All right, we'll probably talk to you guys tomorrow, if all goes well, unless the lights go out, which they very well could. You never know. But let's hope they don't. Thanks for watching, my friends. Take care. And if I don't see you before New Year's, Happy New Year. Get out there and celebrate. But just watch your six.